An elderly black man in his 80s eased a gleaming sedan down the street, and the cops thought landed hard. Less a question than a sentence. Something here feels wrong. He didn't know that the man he'd just judged had once helped write the very laws he now stretched thin. This wasn't routine enforcement. This was justice itself turning to examine the man claiming to protect it. Morning wind in Monroe always knifed through the narrow streets, impatient, as if it couldn't wait for the sun to officially declare a new day had started. Storefronts stayed locked, hand-painted signs dulled by dust, while a few battered pickups snarled past, shredding what remained of quiet in this southern town that used to brag law and trust walk together. The old slogan still sagged from the welcome board on the highway shoulder, letters peeling, but almost no one bothered to slow down long enough to read it anymore. Officer Logan Reddick guided the department's newer cruiser, radio lit but turned low, his fingertips drumming the wheel as he waited for some tiny ripple in traffic. His mind could label non-compliant. He never needed a blown light or screaming siren, no weaving lane change, no exhaust reeking wrong, no database ping. Just a faint offbeat in how a vehicle glided was enough. He didn't call it profiling. In his reports, it became trained instinct. The old black Lincoln ahead looked like it wanted to disappear. Matte finish, state tags chipped, windows clear, but revealing very little. The car wasn't run down, more like something once cherished, then left to age quietly. It rolled steady, not drifting, not speeding, committing nothing any statute could clearly grab. Still, it unsettled Logan. He slipped into the lane behind it, not tailgating, not hanging back. Like a hunter, certain of the scent, but waiting for the wind to tilt his way. In the rear view, he caught the driver, an older black man, gray felt hat, brown vest buttoned clean, posture upright like heading to a ceremony, black gloves resting light on the wheel. The man's hands tapped quietly, eyes locked forward, never flicking toward the mirror. Logan muttered, "Expensive ride for someone who doesn't look like money. That's suspicious." Then thumbed the switch, bathing the street in red and blue. The Lincoln eased over immediately without hesitation or drama, no last-second darting, no sudden acceleration. That calm, that almost practiced calm, bothered Logan more than open defiance ever could. He stepped out, palm resting on his holster, not from fear, but from ritual, one built over years of stopping people. He privately categorized as misaligned, folks who didn't move like they had something to lose. The window lowered slowly. No frantic motions, no visible tremor, no restless eyes. Just a steady gaze that wasn't challenging or yielding, but made Logan feel like he'd become the one under observation. "Morning," he said, voice sitting somewhere between cordial and cold, the tone people use when they've entered a room but haven't decided who's in charge. "You know why I pulled you over?" The old man tipped his head. No smile, no pout. "I imagine you have your reasons," he said, "and I'd rather not guess what story you've told yourself." Logan frowned. The response wasn't aggressive, but it refused to bow. It felt like someone wiping a fogged mirror. Nothing broken, just an unnerving smear where clarity should be. "Where you headed?" Logan asked, this time with more volume, as if loudness could reclaim ground slipping from his feet. "I'm on my way to a farewell," the man replied, gaze still fixed ahead. "Who died?" Logan asked, not out of sympathy, but to puncture the calm. The older man paused. "A piece of history," he answered. Logan squinted. It wasn't a normal reply, carried no legal weight, gave him nothing procedural to hold, yet refused to sound evasive. Back at the cruiser, Logan punched in the plate number. Clean. No flags. No prior complaints. He looked up again. The driver sat exactly as before. Upright. Unbothered, like time wasn't pressing him at all. Logan returned and asked for ID. The man handed over a slim black wallet, edges worn. Inside, a government card with a faded silver emblem caught the light. Official, yet unfamiliar. Logan turned it over, brow knitting. "Never seen this one," he said, half joking, half digging. "Nice fake, if that's what it is." The old man didn't bristle. "If you believe it's not real, you should call it in," he answered softly. No anger, no fear, just a steady invitation for the officer to test his own assumption. Logan hadn't expected that. He was used to stutters, excuses, rising voices, anything that gave him justification to escalate. This quiet steadiness felt like striking at a curtain and finding nothing behind it, something twisted in his gut, unfamiliar and unwelcome. "Where are you from?" he asked. "I live here," the man said. "Since when?" Logan pressed. "Longer than you've been breathing," came the reply. There was no insult in it, but Logan still felt the ground shift. The man's tone held no hatred, no scorn, yet every sentence landed like a full stop that left no room to maneuver. "I'm going to need you to open the trunk," Logan said. "For what purpose?" the man asked. "I suspect something's off." "Would you write that suspicion down?" came the calm question back. "I haven't started any paperwork yet," Logan said. "So this inspection is because of a feeling?" the man asked. Logan exhaled sharply and stepped back a half pace, feeling strangely out of rhythm. He wasn't being defied, not exactly, yet he also wasn't steering this. The man didn't sound like someone afraid of scrutiny or someone with nothing left to prove. He sounded like someone who'd seen this play before. Logan retreated to his cruiser and called dispatch to run the card. When asked for the name, he leaned toward the mic and said quietly, "Theodore L. Mason." The line stayed silent for 3 slow seconds. Logan tapped the console. "You copy?" he asked. The voice that finally answered wasn't dispatch. It was lower, smoother, and carried a colder edge. "Are you requesting identity verification for Justice Theodore Lee Mason?" the new voice asked. Logan swallowed. "If that's what the card says, then yeah, that's him," he replied. "Hold, please." The silence that followed wasn't long, but it thickened quickly. It wasn't the quiet of a busy office. It felt like someone somewhere had just realized a line had been crossed. Logan's back straightened. For the first time that morning, his fingers stopped their restless tapping. Doubt crept in, not about safety, but about the shape of what he'd stepped into. When the line clicked again, no one spoke right away. Just the faint clatter of keys. No clarification, no reassurance, only a silence that pressed down his spine like an unspoken warning. Logan cut the call, not because things were resolved, but because suddenly he needed to reassert control face to face. His boots thudded louder than usual on the nearly empty asphalt. The sky had brightened, a soft gray blue, but the air around the Lincoln felt thicker. The older man sat exactly as before, hands visible, breathing measured, almost statue still without needing recognition. Logan stopped at the window, holding the ID card between thumb and fingers, not offering it back yet. His thumb pressed the edge like he was testing his own authority rather than the plastic itself. "You sure this is legit?" Logan asked, layering his voice with threat and skepticism. "It's the only identification I carry," the man replied. "Believing it or not, that choice belongs to you." The words themselves were mild. What rattled Logan was the manner. A man speaking without flinching, without groveling, as if he had long ago grown tired of explaining his existence. Logan's instincts screamed at him to reassert dominance. "Step out of the vehicle," he said, voice harder now. The older man turned fully, eyes steady, not aggressive, but unbending. "Under which regulation?" he asked. "State policy," Logan replied. "If I have reasonable suspicion, I can ask you to exit the car." "And your reasonable suspicion is what exactly?" Logan faltered. All he had was unease. "Your behavior is odd," he managed. "Like how you won't meet my eyes. Like you're avoiding cooperation." "I am cooperating," the man said. "What I won't do is submit when there's no need. There's a difference, officer, and you should know it." His tone held no rebellion, but dripped with experience, the kind that makes people in uniform feel their authority loosening, not because anyone is fighting them, but because their usual script stops working. Logan straightened, jaw clenched. He felt his responses fraying, like a lock being turned by the wrong key. "Open the trunk!" he barked. The older man didn't rush. He unbuckled, pushed the door open, and rose with unhurried grace. "I'll open it," he said. "But if there's nothing inside, what will you do then?" Logan's fists tightened. That was the scenario he'd never rehearsed, finding no violation and still feeling threatened. He'd been trained to spot flaws, not to face someone flawless who made him feel small. The man walked to the back, pulled an old key from his inner pocket, metal worn smooth by decades of use, and slid it into the trunk lock. Logan's hand drifted back toward his holster. The trunk lifted. A bouquet of white flowers wrapped in brown paper, a carefully folded fedora, and a small wooden box etched with the name Eleanor Mason. The older man brushed the lid of the box, fingers lingering, then turned. "What exactly do you need to search?" he asked. "This is everything. No weapons, no secrets. I travel with memories, not contraband." Logan stood speechless. Nothing about the scene fit the narrative he'd been ready to write. Nothing illegal. Nothing flashy. Just quiet reverence that refused to twist into guilt. The old man studied him now, no longer inquisitive or challenging, just sad, not for himself, but for young men in uniforms who believed their badge allowed them to define everyone they met. "You're doing your job," he said gently. "I understand that. But your job doesn't entitle you to misunderstand who I am and turn that misunderstanding into suspicion." Logan had been disarmed before, overruled, even shouted down. But he had never been made to feel so miscast, not by force or refusal, but by a voice and gaze that suggested he'd rehearsed the wrong role entirely. He turned away from the open trunk, feeling his authority slide from his shoulders like a coat in warm rain. For a brief second, Officer Logan Reddick had no commands left to give. The trunk remained open, the flowers and box arranged like a small altar on wheels. Logan stared as if trying to decode a painting whose meaning everyone else seemed to understand instantly. He didn't ask more questions, but he didn't leave either. Backing away now felt like losing publicly, even with no onlookers, like admitting this whole stop had been wrong from its very first impulse. In that stretched silence, like a string close to snapping, the old man gently closed the trunk as if shutting the cover on a chapter of grief he'd carried too long. He turned toward Logan and gave a small nod, not deferential, not defiant. A simple acknowledgement, like recognizing a reality that should never be resisted but must never be mistaken for justice. That nod sent a cold line down Logan's back. Not fear, exactly, but discomfort born from not knowing how to read what he'd just seen. He was used to darting eyes, babbled excuses, loud pleas. Now he stood in front of someone whose quiet presence, without one shouted word, made nearly everyone else around feel they were the ones exposed. Logan searched for some hairline crack. He could widen, a stray inconsistency, a misplaced word, but all he saw was an old man standing straight, movements unhurried, dignity needing no badge to legitimize it. He flipped the ID again, not hunting for flaws anymore, but stalling. The badge's silver edges were worn, the print small but unmistakable, judicial authorization under state constitutional authority, Justice Theodore Mason. Logan squinted. He'd seen similar phrasing in documentaries, in exposés about judicial power, but never in his hand, never attached to someone he'd flagged for simply appearing out of place. The older man noticed the shift in Logan's face, not in widened eyes or sudden apology, but in the quiet way someone does when they see an assumption starting to crumble. He reached out and took the card back, two fingers calm and controlled. Logan didn't resist, but the moment felt less like returning identification and more like being quietly dismissed from a courtroom. "Let me ask again," Logan said, voice lower now. "Where exactly can this credential be verified?" The man looked him straight in the eyes. "Across a lifetime, in a conscience, and if you need something bureaucratic, by calling the state Supreme Court's clerk." His words were soft but razor clean, sliding under Logan's practiced skepticism. Logan didn't dial. He knew he didn't have to. Every instinct glowed red, not because the man was dangerous, but because he wasn't scared. Sweat gathered between Logan's shoulders, not from heat, but from being tested without understanding the exam. Terms he relied on: reasonable suspicion, officer discretion, compliance, suddenly sounded thin beside someone who refused to play along. While he fumbled for his composure, a woman with a shopping bag slowed on the sidewalk. She recognized the older man instantly, her eyes widening before she edged back, hugging the curb like witnessing something forbidden. She didn't greet him by name. She simply stared at Logan, waiting, as if daring him to move an inch further into a line he'd already crossed. Her silence felt like a held verdict. Logan noticed her, and in that instant stopped feeling like a cop. He felt like a guy in a uniform standing in front of another man. He no longer had the right to question. "You want an escort to your destination?" Logan asked, clawing for dignity. The older man shook his head lightly. "The paths I walk were never meant for chaperones," he answered. The sentence carried no sting, but it hit Logan like a judgment, a refusal without insult, a gentle reminder that some roads are meant to be walked without armed permission. Logan froze as the Lincoln's door closed, engine humming back to life. The car pulled away slowly, just as it had approached, leaving behind only a long freight of silence. When the sedan vanished behind the red brick buildings, Logan lowered his gaze. Not exactly from guilt, not yet, but because he suddenly understood that whatever had happened no longer belonged to him. The Lincoln was gone, but its absence hung on the street like a fine crack You don't see until you trip over it and realize something below has shifted for good. Logan stood rooted, unable to move forward or retreat. The wind threaded through his uniform seams, colder than the morning warranted, making the fabric feel too thin to hide behind. Eventually, he slipped back into his cruiser. His hand found the ignition from habit, but the car stayed idling at the curb. His gut insisted this wasn't finished, not by the book, but inside him. He glanced at the radio display, then tapped into the system and began typing the name, Theodore L. Mason. This time, it wasn't for verification. It was for explanation. He needed context, a biography to justify how a man whose face belonged on official portraits ended up standing on a street shoulder like any other suspect. And under that need was something smaller and sharper, a wish, for any reason, however thin, that might make him feel he hadn't just spat unknowingly on something sacred. The search pulled up instantly. Portrait, titles, appointment date, archival footage from judicial conferences, and a steady parade of interviews over decades. One video, more than 20 years old, caught Logan's attention. In it, Justice Mason addressed a racial justice ceremony, speaking about the right to be suspected less when you have lived more decently, not as a reward, but as a basic expectation. Logan killed the sound but couldn't drag his eyes from the screen. It felt like watching a Last Testament he'd accidentally trampled, written not in ink, but in lifetimes of struggle. He stepped back out of the cruiser. No passing cars now, no onlookers. But that emptiness didn't soothe him anymore. Silence no longer meant privacy. It meant there were no witnesses if he backslid. He drifted toward the place where the Lincoln had been. The trunk was shut now, the scene ordinary, yet he stood there like someone hoping for a missed clue to magically appear. His thoughts turned dark. A man like that? What's he really doing with such ceremony? A bitter voice whispered. Maybe he wanted attention. People love putting on a show. Logan climbed back into the car and flipped on the radio. This time, he spoke first. I just completed a vehicle stop, he said. Subject displayed unclear compliance and used evasive language, potential misuse of status. His voice sounded even, but each phrase carried an edge he hadn't processed. Name, came the reply. Theodore Lee Mason, he answered quickly. There was a pause. Did you say Justice? Theodore L. Mason? The voice asked. Logan didn't say yes or no. I'm questioning whether he leveraged his position to avoid a full inspection, he replied instead. With any other driver, I'd have ordered a complete trunk search, he continued. He worked the arrogant silence angle. Logan even scoffed, trying to sculpt himself as the wronged party. But the question that came back cut clean. Are you reporting misconduct or trying to explain away a bruised ego? Logan didn't answer. He shut the radio off, knuckles whitening around the steering wheel. Phrases from training resurfaced: occupational pride, reflexive response to loss of control, powerlessness dressed up as legal argument. He'd once thought those were just seminar buzzwords, meant for other departments, other failures. Now there was no one left to blame, no storm to hide in. This stop had become something else, an uneven collision between practiced authority and the seasoned calm of someone who'd watched systems fail before. Logan realized he had never really been the one asking questions. Not in this encounter. Maybe not in many. He'd been following a script while people like Mason quietly measured him. He stood beside his car, feeling like a student leaving an exam without any idea where he'd gone wrong. His earlier claim that Mason's demeanor was problematic, that he weaponized status, now felt embarrassingly thin. No one rushed to reassure him. No voice chimed in with support. And just as that silence fully settled, the woman with the grocery bag reappeared in his memory. Words still unsaid but heavy. In real time, she stood a few yards away now, hands trembling around the bag handles. Her eyes were wide as she finally blurted, "My God, that's him!" Logan turned, irritation flaring at the interruption. "You know that man?" he snapped. She stared back, half warning, half disbelief. "You don't?" she asked, then continued before he answered. "He's the judge who signed my brother's release when everyone else wanted him locked away. He saw something in that boy nobody else even bothered to look for," she said. "And you pulled him over like this." Logan froze. He'd been cursed at before, threatened, but never faced such plain disappointment from someone with nothing to personally gain. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. This is official duty," he said. But his tone had thinned. No longer the firm command, but a fading plea for respect slipping from his grasp. She didn't move. Instead, she nodded toward where the Lincoln had been. "You even know how many powerful roles he turned down just to keep one bench?" He chose responsibility over fame. Logan had nothing to counter that. Enforcement jargon sounded hollow against lived gratitude. Each of her sentences flipped another stone over inside him, exposing assumptions he'd never examined. Across the street, a young guy on a bike stopped, chained his ride to a pole, and raised his phone to record, not Logan, but the older man quietly moving around his own car. Logan stalked toward him, hand raised. "Turn that off! This is an active police situation." The young man met his stare. "I'm not recording you," he said. "I'm recording dignity when I see it. Some folks go their whole lives without witnessing that from someone who doesn't need to be calm," the young man added. Logan didn't reply. He walked back to his cruiser. Each step weighted like lead. He'd been briefed about public image, about losing narrative control in the age of phones, but he'd never pictured that loss arriving through the quiet resilience of a man who barely spoke. A child walked by with her mother. "Mom, why'd the police stop him?" the little girl asked. Her mother said nothing, just glanced at Logan and shook her head slowly. That simple shake hit harder than any shouted insult. Logan felt himself sliding into a hollow where the idea that procedure automatically meant justice began unraveling. Online, the young cyclist's video had already begun to spread. 45 seconds, no soundtrack, no filters, just an elderly black man stepping from a Lincoln, opening a trunk, placing white flowers on its edge. Then he turned toward the officer, face free of rage, eyes level. Nearly 200,000 people watched in 2 hours, lingering afterward as if they'd been the ones examined. Comments appeared in lines, then paragraphs, then torrents. "I don't know who he is," one person wrote, "but the way he stayed quiet makes me ashamed I ever called this not my problem." Another posted, "This isn't just about race. It's an insult to the idea of justice, wrapped up in a shrug." But the most piercing came from a verified account. "I served under Judge Mason overseas," it read. "If he hadn't intervened in 91, I'd be dead. Today I watched him treated like a suspect that I can't forgive." Logan hadn't seen the message yet, but he felt the street changing around him. A car pulled up opposite, window rolling down to reveal a woman in hospital scrubs, fatigue etched on her face. If a cop doesn't know who he's dealing with, she shouted, he shouldn't wear that uniform. Logan turned away, but she raised her voice. And not because he's a judge, because no elder deserves that. Even if he were just an old man on his way to a funeral, you had no right to treat him like a perp, she finished, every word scouring the shine off his badge. A few blocks away, students clustered around a phone outside a cafe, watching the clip between classes. One woman in a hoodie, coffee cooling in her hand, asked, "What do you think they'll actually do?" Her friend shrugged slowly. "No idea, but I know this. I won't see a traffic stop the same way again." That's where change starts. In those quiet admissions, not lofty rulings. That afternoon, a local news station aired a short segment. "A traffic stop in Monroe has gone viral," the anchor said. The subject, Justice Theodore Mason, a major figure in racial justice decisions. "The police department has issued no official comment," she added. 90 seconds. That was all. Still, it cracked open a pressure chamber that had been waiting decades to vent. Logan sat in his cruiser, eyes locked on the wheel. His phone buzzed with a single text from his wife. "You okay?" 2 words, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. Across town, in a corner diner, an older man with silver hair and a veteran's jacket paused mid-spoonful when the footage aired on the mounted TV. He set his soup down without finishing. His eyes tracked every frame of Mason's movements. When the broadcast cut to commercials, he signaled the server. "Check, please. I need to go see him," he said. "You know the man in the video?" the server asked. The veteran nodded. "I was the last soldier he spared. Now it's my turn to thank him properly," he said. The receipt hadn't finished printing when the server's phone chimed with link after link to the clip, now titled "Justice Mason Pulled Over." It was no longer just a local curiosity. Back at Monroe PD, internal systems lit up. Unusual traffic hit the state judicial database. Journalists, watchdog groups, and the 8th Federal Judicial Circuit Office all digging into Mason's file at once. The question wasn't who he was. That was documented. The question was why a man with federal coordination, flags across 48 layers of jurisdiction, had just been treated like any random stop. Logan's superior, Captain Marcus Hale, received an urgent internal alert. Verify and address public trust concerns regarding Justice Theodore Mason. The wording stayed measured, but every syllable cut into the department's thin armor. Hale called Logan. By the 3rd ring, Logan answered, voice dry. "Reddick here." Hale didn't bother with small talk. "You stopped a living pillar of this state's legal spine," he said. "And you did it like you had no clue what you were touching." Hale wasn't asking for explanations. "I want you off that street. No one sent you to find fault where none existed." "You tried to block cameras. Nobody ordered that either," Hale continued. "Now I am ordering this. Stand down. That name you pulled over isn't just a person. It's a history no memo can bleach." Logan's grip tightened on the phone. He understood. This wasn't just disciplinary talk. Mason's name had become dangerous. Not because Mason threatened anyone, but because each time it was spoken, trust in the badge cracked. Inside the station, whispers floated along corridors. Logan stopped the wrong man at the worst time, some said. But even that felt too soft. You don't stop Judge Mason and stroll away unchanged. An independent newsroom launched a series titled Messages Never Sent, built on leaked Monroe PD emails. One installment focused on Logan, praised for high anomaly detection, now re-examined as someone whose instincts weren't sharp, just skewed. This time, People weren't only questioning Logan. They were asking who had known all along, who had seen the patterns, and who had quietly decided it wasn't serious enough to confront until Mason forced the mirror up. Those leaked emails from mid-level supervisors 3 years back were painfully clear. Reddick reacts quick with black drivers, but outcomes look fine. Don't interfere unless complaints go formal. Another message read, "If we scrub his numbers, our stats tank." No exclamation marks, no slurs, just bureaucracy shaving ethics down to a thin, efficient edge. The praise, "administrative accomplice," exploded online. It wasn't just patrol clips anymore. People started mining payrolls, assignment charts, meeting minutes like archaeologists, dusting off quiet, paper-thin confessions. Blurry screenshots didn't only show uniforms. They showed HR sign-offs, managers approving monitor lists, break room jokes about Logan's nose for trouble, and award boards praising officers already flagged internally. A new hashtag surged overnight: signed and silent. Old memos, yellowed flags, cautious emails from city attorneys urging discretion in target selection resurfaced, posted by staff who once thought they were merely spectators. One 2021 Internal Affairs memo, leaked by a former clerk after a lawsuit, showed Captain Hale's predecessor warned in bold, "Monitor Officer Reddick, pattern stop skewed by race. Recommend non-public reassignment immediately." No signature followed. No routing stamp. The warning sat unsent in the legal chief's draft folder for 2 years, like a wound hidden under office stationery, pretending not to bleed. Asked privately why he'd never acted, the former legal chief shrugged. "I figured someone else would handle it." When that line leaked, it needed no commentary to burn through headlines. A cut-up clip of that sentence, looped over soft piano, crossed 5 million views in 48 hours. "I thought someone else would" became the most damning confession the system ever made. A rushed survey from the Law Enforcement Administrators Guild followed. 72% of staff admitted noticing signs of misconduct, yet feeling unauthorized to speak up. The number landed like a punch, not a statistic. Overnight, nobody bought the "few bad apples" line anymore. A meme spread, cracked concrete with the caption, "No one smashed it. Everyone just saw the fracture and kept walking." Logan stopped being the center of the storm. Not because he'd been forgiven, but because the camera lens widened, finally capturing the machinery that had rewarded him for nearly a decade. The Federal Observer ran a front-page headline: "Silence isn't neutral anymore." Underneath, it listed 35 cases mirroring Reddick's pattern over 5 years. Officers disciplined for bias? 2, not 20. Just 2. The numbers needed no op-ed. They moved like indictments in spreadsheet form. The article's last line cut: "Deepest. Wrongdoers aren't always villains, but the ones who stay quiet are never innocent." At Monroe PD, a closed-door meeting was called. No cameras, no minutes. Just a conference room heavy with burnt coffee and tension. One veteran finally stood, voice slicing through rehearsed defensiveness. "I sent 2 warnings," he admitted. "I knew Reddick had a problem, but I didn't want my peer review score tanked. That's on me." No applause, no rebuttal, just smothering silence. That was when those who'd sort of known began to shake, not from fear of suspension, but realizing doors they'd hoped to walk through later had quietly sealed behind their own inaction. Miles away, no agenda listed his appearance, no escort waited. Yet when the special legislative hearing on police standards began, a man in a charcoal coat walked in alone, notebook in hand. Justice Theodore Mason didn't check programs or seating charts. He moved with slow certainty past the front rows of murmuring officials, turned down a stone hallway, and slipped into a seat near the back. Fifth row from the exit. No nameplate, no reserved sign. Still, within minutes, nobody dared suggest he didn't belong. The air shifted, conversations flattening as if someone had tightened the room's conscience. He wasn't a celebrity. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Everyone knew some people don't need microphones to make a chamber second guess every word they're about to put on record. The presiding chair started the hearing, polished voice steady, but he stumbled twice, gaze drifting toward Mason's row. It felt less like addressing lawmakers, more like speaking under a watchful, unblinking standard. A young representative on his first term rose after 2 rounds of scripted talking points. "I don't have charts," he said. "I just know someone here changed my father's life in 1999. Eyes turned, but Mason never glanced up. He simply kept writing, calm strokes across the page, like a judge documenting a trial whose verdict would never appear in any official transcript. A State House camera caught the moment the room collectively seemed to inhale. A reporter drafted a caption on the live stream. "One man silent, 42 others straighten their backs." That line spread across 60 outlets in 20 minutes, stripped of hashtags and commentary, often shortened to 4 words that somehow said everything. Silence needs no statement. Later, a senior delegate stood. "I clerked for Justice Mason," she said. "He never taught me how to win. He taught me how not to win and still keep my honor." Seeing him in the back row today, she added, "I'm reminded, justice doesn't demand the podium. It just wants to be visibly present in the room." The sentence never reached the official minutes. But news tickers didn't care about formal records. They rolled a paraphrase nationwide. "Since when do Supreme Court judges sit in the back while everyone else pretends they aren't on trial?" At Lakefront Law School, students printed that idea on black class shirts. Justice doesn't need to speak. It just needs to be seen. No logo, no mascot, just white letters carrying a quiet challenge. When a campus forum on ethics aired, half the audience wore those shirts. Cameras meant for the panel drifted toward the crowd instead, drawn to the message worn between shoulder blades, not spoken into mics. Through the entire 3-hour hearing, Mason never took the floor. No nods, no frowns, no obvious signals. Only one moment, from a rear camera angle, broke that stillness. A young attorney rose to defend a procedural compromise. Mason's gaze lifted and met hers. She hesitated, sat down. Asked later why, she simply said, "I couldn't defend what I didn't believe, not before him." His pencil didn't pause. Short, fragmented notes. No committee would ever request. When adjournment came, he closed the notebook, slipped it into his pocket, and walked out without anyone daring to detain him. As the door clicked shut, the chair looked over the room. "I don't know what becomes law from today," he said, "but someone in the back made all of us look backward." For the first time in a long while, Mason left a legislative hall exactly as he entered it, wordless. Yet behind him sat a chamber full of people suddenly hyper-aware of how they'd been sitting all along. Across the state, Lieutenant-turned-file clerk Logan sat alone in a small television studio, 2 towns over. No studio audience, just a young producer, fine-tuning levels like she was archiving a footnote. "You ready?" she asked. Logan nodded, not like someone eager to speak, but like a man who knew if he stayed silent now, even his silence would become another lie. On the waiting monitor, a news ticker scrolled by. 3 students refuse civics homework, asking if obeying harmful laws still makes you a good citizen. No mention of Mason, but Logan recognized the echo. The camera light flipped red, no intro graphics, no music bed, just a flat shot of Logan in a washed-out blue shirt, no rank stripes, no badge to hide behind anymore. "I used to believe I was doing what was right," he said slowly, eyes not yet daring to meet the lens, gaze fixed somewhere beyond it, where Mason's trunk still hung open. "I followed procedure, used the right terminology, filed reports correctly. I convinced myself that if feelings stayed out of it, I was a good cop." The words sounded rehearsed, but his breathing didn't. Then he stopped. No transition, no anchor voice to rescue him, just a silence long enough to make viewers feel like intruders, forced to sit with a man wrestling himself in real time. Outside the booth, a tech quietly turned away from the glass, not out of outrage, but because some confessions are so bare they make even bystanders feel complicit just by watching. "What I see now," Logan continued, voice quieter, "is that shutting emotion out can be its own problem. Emotion's what lets you recognize a person, not just a case number." "I didn't do that." For the first time, his eyes locked on the camera. No theatrics, no visible tears. More like an officer reading a scene report where the crime scene was his own reflection. "I pulled him over because I couldn't reconcile the man with the car. The calm with what I'd been trained to treat as suspicious," he said. His composure tripped alarms I never questioned, he repeated, slower. Unspoken expectations, as if carving the phrase onto his own record. Behind the lens, the producer realized this wasn't just remorse, it was an autopsy of habits he'd thought were virtues. "I didn't scream. I didn't rough him up. I didn't use my weapon," Logan said. "But I put him in a position I'd never imagined placing myself. That's the part that terrifies me." He didn't wipe his face or drop his head. His palms just flattened on his thighs, the posture of a man trying to stay balanced on a stool with one leg sawed off. A rustle in the hallway, someone folding chairs, stole his glance for half a second. Later, viewers would replay that blink like a seismic shift, sensing something irretrievable had just cracked inside him. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Deitz," he said. "I don't deserve it." That line wasn't in his notes. The producer let it ride, knowing edits would only dilute what made the moment real. "I just hope the next people to wear this uniform don't think they can strip empathy away and still call what they're doing justice." After that, he fell silent, offering nothing more. The producer murmured, "We got it." Logan answered, "It's not enough, but I honestly don't know what else there is to say." The final cut ran 4 minutes, 32 seconds, untouched. No overlays, no intro bumper, no hashtag on the lower third. Yet within days, law schools, judicial academies, police colleges requested the raw clip, not for PR, but to file under training materials. In a Northern California classroom, a professor paused the video and turned to the room. "Does he feel remorse?" she asked. "No," one student said. "Not exactly." "I agree," the professor replied. "But we don't need his guilt. We need his refusal to lie about what he did." No one took notes. They just quietly gathered their bags and left. Outside, there were no marches, no banners, no trending slogans. But something had shifted. Resistance started moving underground, steady as groundwater, harder to see, harder to stop, infinitely more patient. In a Tennessee classroom, during roll call, a teacher mispronounced a black student's name like she had many times. No snickers this time, no whispered corrections, just a stillness that felt different. The boy bowed his head, wrote in his notebook, "I am not your mispronunciation." A classmate snapped a photo. No caption, only that sentence visible. It hit 100,000 shares in 3 days. Commenters didn't ask his name. They simply wrote, "He doesn't need to be called right to exist. He just deserves not to be called wrong." The sentiment traveled faster than any civics lecture. In an Oregon beach town, tiny plastic fedoras began appearing on license plates. Not vacation hats, 3D printed replicas of Mason's fedora from the trunk video, barely big as a thumb. No official merch, no website. Souvenir shops ran out of printing filament as neighbors quietly started attaching the little hats to bumpers. A small sign that said, "I saw, I won't unsee." In a Nebraska courthouse, front desk staff began greeting people differently. Not "What's your name?" but "How would you like me to say your name correctly?" Small rewarding, huge shift in who needed to adjust. And it wasn't some sweeping reform, but for those misnamed all their lives, it was the first time the system bent toward them. Instead of demanding, they fold themselves into its mispronounced comfort. In Minneapolis, a lieutenant edited night shift protocol. Before writing a citation, officers had to ask, "Can I confirm your name's spelling so I don't get it wrong?" A pause forced into rote paperwork. That pause rippled. At a Des Moines precinct, an older man teared up when asked. His ticket listed his dead son's name instead of his own. Same birthday, same last name. A clerical cut reopened. The watch commander handwrote a new memo, the first he'd crafted personally in years. From now on, never let someone's name be mistaken for the one they buried. It spread faster than formal orders. In Chicago, a precinct supervisor added a required reflection box to reports. Not for punishment, but to remind cops. Their paperwork didn't just record others' errors, it mapped their own ethical footprints, too. One rookie wrote, "I'm not sure I can stay neutral when they look at me like they're about to vanish." The line wasn't underlined, but the supervisor read it aloud at lineup. "We're not filing another report," he said, "unless we can state clearly who we're writing about and why." No one laughed. They all recognized that why had been implied for too long. Logan heard about these small changes, not from headlines, he'd stopped reading those, but from the eyes of neighbors who passed him now that he no longer wore a uniform. They didn't flinch away like he was a threat. They didn't smile either. They looked at him like an old ink blot on clean paper, too small to rip the page, too deep to erase. At his usual cafe, nobody banned him, but when he reached the counter, the barista avoided his eyes, skipped the loyalty card question, and quietly wrote on his cup, "Wishing you a peaceful day." No name, just that line, usually reserved for grieving regulars. It wasn't forgiveness. It was recognition that he was walking through something the menu didn't have words for. Meanwhile, Justice Mason stayed interview shy. No memoirs, no lecture tours, no talk show appearances. He refused every request to attach his name to campaigns, scholarships, or awards, politely sending back the same answer: unnecessary. That didn't keep people from invoking him, just differently. Not Mason said, but someone once made me rewrite my report, or someone made me look at my student when I read their name. Tiny fedoras spread from random novelty to quiet shorthand. You'd see them on cars in hospital lots, teacher parking spaces, squad car bumpers. No official meaning, but everyone in the know understood. I remember. At Maplebrook Elementary in Illinois, a teacher wrote, "Good citizen" on the board, planning the usual lesson. Obey laws, respect others, keep promises. This time the lesson revolted against the outline. As she underlined, "respect," a boy raised his hand, effortfully calm. "If somebody follows rules but keeps hurting people," he asked, "are they still a good citizen?" The room went so quiet it hummed. No textbook covered this. No test prep listed it. Every kid and the adult at the front knew. If they dodged it, every future definition of good in that classroom would ring hollow. The teacher met his eyes, saw his knuckles white against the desk, then stepped back, tore a blank sheet, and wrote 3 words, legal but harmful. She taped it over her prepared slide. "This is today's topic," she said, "maybe all weeks." In the hallway, the principal overheard. He later emailed staff, "If we teach like yesterday, don't call this place a school." The email leaked. People weren't shocked by the progressive tone. They were stunned. A principal had used conscience, not policy language, as a directive. That day, Maplebrook Civics had no quizzes, no homework, just single sheets of paper with questions. If I make someone cry, but don't get punished, am I right? If adults hurt people legally, should I grow up like them or not? Why does justice need a video before anyone believes it? A local officer parent came in the next morning after his kid asked, "Dad, have you ever scared somebody and never paid for it?" The teacher offered no defense. She showed him the pile of questions. He left without speaking, then filed a request to overhaul the town's training curriculum. His stated reason, "I want my kid to trust me." A publisher posted one anonymous page. "If the right thing makes everyone quiet, is it still right?" No context, no school name. It spread to hundreds of thousands of timelines in a day. Those scribbled pages were eventually compiled and sent to a National Education Council, then adopted into teacher training materials. Newspapers printed them unedited, no commentary, under a single line. They didn't name Mason, but he's in every question. A 30-second video from outside Maplebrook's door showed the teacher reading, "If I follow rules and somebody still cries, whose fault is that?" 2 million views later, profile photos turned into blank sheets. Schools across states began dedicating a monthly unwritten questions period. Not graded, not optional, but teachers weren't allowed to dodge them. The goal wasn't answers, just refusing to act like those questions didn't exist. In Michigan, over 200 students attended the first session. Administrators expected cliché prompts. Instead, a 3rd grader asked, "If my teacher sees someone blamed unfairly and says nothing, should I stay quiet when I'm grown?" Staff didn't respond. They reevaluated their handbook. For the first time in 20 years, the adults rewrote policy because they couldn't answer a child without betraying something bigger. In Texas, some parents protested, claiming the program undermined traditional values. The tension eased when a 2nd grader, daughter of a patrol sergeant, told a local reporter, "Dad doesn't only ask my scores, he asks who got treated badly." Within days, participation quadrupled, not because of legislation, but because too many kids now knew how to ask questions adults had avoided for decades. Avoiding them suddenly felt indefensible. At a statewide curriculum summit, Maplebrook's story came up. A veteran professor, once opposed to social context in law, admitted, "The code can stop wrongdoing. Only morality stops us from hurting people when the law allows it." The quote never made the official recap, but a first-year law student recorded it, posting, "Saving this for the day someone brave enough rewrites what they taught their whole career." Ethics classes replayed it all semester. Clips of his remark appeared next to a photo of small hands holding a stubby pencil under the line, "I don't need a statute to know what hurts someone." Law suddenly looked smaller than conscience. At Mason's regional legal office, a new mailbox appeared at reception. Not for filings, but children's letters from across the country. Crayon scribbles and lopsided cursive, addressed to the judge who stayed quiet. Some notes said only, "I know who you are. I want to grow up not hurting people when nobody's watching." No return addresses. They didn't expect replies. Writing it felt like enough. When that box started overflowing, Logan received a notification. His teenage son had submitted an online request for 2 days off school. Reason listed as, "Don't want to sit under the name everyone's whispering about." The detail that pierced him? It came from Logan's own phone. His son had logged into the family account, not to skip class, but to step away from a collapsing image he'd once stood inside. That request landed as Logan left an internal meeting announcing all officers flagged for bias would attend ethics retraining and record personal video statements for their files. "Who wants to watch themselves confess?" someone muttered. Logan didn't answer, but his son's message echoed louder than any policy change. Out in the parking lot, shirt wrinkled with the day's tension, he opened the notification and felt something sink. He drove home. The usual ritual door opening to a kid sprinting out, asking, "Did you catch anyone today?" was gone. The house greeted him with the quiet of someplace holding its breath. On the dining table lay a civics notebook, corner folded. As he went to move it, a page outlined in red caught his eye, covered in his son's slanting handwriting. "What do you do when someone who made you feel safe later makes others afraid?" No assignment label, no teacher's corrections, just that sentence tilting left like his son's signature always did. Logan froze, palm resting on the cover like it might burn him. In the next room, his boy sat clutching a pillow. TV dark, phone untouched, eyes fixed on the carpet. Logan sat opposite, not far, but distance hung between them, like a canyon cut by unasked questions. "You seen the news?" Logan tried, hoping desperately maybe the boy had missed some of it. His son looked up, gaze blowing through defenses like wind through blinds. "Yeah, but I didn't need the news to know." He unfolded a crumpled printout from social media. Headline: "Elderly black man ordered to raise his hands by Officer Logan Reddick for safety." Logan recognized the frame instantly. He'd once filed it as routine. In the image, the man's eyes weren't on the camera. They were on him, asking wordlessly, "Is this your idea of protection?" The boy didn't add anything, just left the paper on the table and turned away, as if words would only cheapen what they both saw. Logan thought about tearing it up, but his shaking hands stayed put. Fire couldn't burn away what had already shifted in his son's memory of him. That reel was permanent now. His son finally spoke, voice barely over a whisper. "You always said a good person doesn't make people scared when they walk in a room. So why'd that man have to stand like that?" There was no training module for that question. No legal citation could cover it. It demanded a currency Logan had overdrafted. The integrity reflected in the eyes of the kid who once idolized him. I didn't think I was doing wrong, Logan said, the words tumbling out like someone trying to locate himself in a life suddenly unrecognizable. It wasn't an excuse. It sounded more like a lost address. The space between them grew heavy, not with sobbing, but with what sat between broken trust and whatever might come after. On the table, department files spilled from Logan's bag, one name highlighted: Mason Theodore L. His son's eyes caught the red bracket around a line Logan had written years earlier: Justice. Mason disrupted protocol and undermined clear officer authority. The boy didn't accuse, he just read it like a verdict reached too late. You wrote that, he murmured. Not a question. Confirmation. Logan stiffened. His son's nod wasn't agreement or acceptance. It was the quiet closing of a chapter where Dad and Hero had once shared the same page. You don't have to explain, his son said, voice steady, heartbeat already. Past shock. I know you used to be good at your job. I also know good job and right thing aren't always the same. Logan almost reached for his favorite words, justice, procedure, training, but stopped as his son's phone lit with a clip from another student council meeting. A kid on screen said, I learned law from the man who pulled my dad over. I learned ethics when Dad couldn't look me in the eye at dinner. The council room in that video was silent. No names needed. Logan recognized the pattern anyway. And now that same silence draped his own living room. His son slipped away to his room, door closing gently. No slammed hinges, no shouted accusations. Just the soft click of a chapter ending. Logan heard the faint turn of the bedroom lock, its sound louder than any judge's gavel in his mind. In the kitchen, he noticed a faded drawing on the fridge, both of them in uniforms, stick figure smiles under the words, When I grow up, I'll be like Dad. One corner was water-stained. He took it down, couldn't toss it. He folded it carefully and slid it into the bottom drawer, the same place he'd once stored his service weapon, now emptied of anything he trusted himself to hold. In that moment, without cameras or comment sections, Logan wasn't a suspended officer or a public defendant. He was a father stripped of the only title no tribunal could ever officially restore. While he stared through the living room window at a yard that looked unchanged across the state, Theodore Mason climbed the steps of Northwind University's conference hall, where a banner celebrated 30 years of justice reform. His name sat on the program, but most assumed he'd decline as usual. For months he ducked panels, ignored invitations, and moved through public spaces like a living still frame, reproportioning people's posture without saying a word. Today, in his familiar worn shirt and tilted fedora, pencil tucked in his pocket, the auditorium volume dipped as he entered. Rose leaned forward without noticing, as if gravity had quietly shifted toward him. Organizers had decided, if he refused the podium, they'd move straight to awards. Within 10 minutes of his arrival, that plan died. Giving anything to him suddenly felt redundant, bordering on insult. Even when his name was announced, Mason remained in the third row, hand resting on the back of the chair, ahead, eyes fixed on the banner. Reform doesn't start with systems. It starts when systems finally listen. The phrase had circled the internet and been printed on merch for months, but nobody had seen him stand beneath it before. The hall grew still as his gaze drifted to a front-row politician. That official had once dismissed police bias as emotional overreaction. Seeing Mason look his direction, color draining from his face, not from fear of power, but from realizing a wordless gaze could strip away his pretense. After a long shared silence, Mason walked to the podium, not up the main steps, but along a side aisle, forcing everyone to literally turn toward the conscience they'd been quoting without embodying. Livestream viewers flooded social media with a single dash, a communal symbol of held breath. The mic was hot, recorders humming, backup scripts ready in case he refused. He didn't. He spoke exactly once. At this point, he asked calmly, scanning the room, "Who among you still believes I didn't know is acceptable?" No fury, no accusation, just a question ringing like a bell you can't unhear. 10 seconds stretched. No heads dropped. No one glanced around. They looked only at him, not expecting a follow-up, but pressed into confronting themselves. The question needed no answer, only a permanent place in memory. Mason stepped away without waiting for applause. No bow, no wave. He disappeared down a side corridor washed with narrow light. Someone considered calling him back, but instinctively knew. Asking twice meant missing the point. There was no viral montage, no breathless headline, just a quiet line echoing through legal forums. Justice Theodore Mason. No keynote, no flowers. One question, then gone, like a verdict that stamps itself. A law school in Massachusetts printed that sentence on the backs of graduation folders, no footnotes attached. In a Kentucky station, a new captain pinned a bulletin. Any report, including "I didn't know," must explain why you didn't try to. It wasn't a threat. It was an expectation. The night shift sat unusually long that week, not arguing stats, but renegotiating what knowing meant. Awareness became a duty, not a convenient defense. No front pages featured Mason anymore, yet he lingered everywhere, in revised forms asking if someone felt targeted, in classrooms filled with unwritten questions, in the slight pause before a cop speaks at a window. And now, if you've stayed with this story to this moment, I'll ask you, not as a viewer, but as part of it, what will you do with the silence you once kept? If any part touched you, don't just scroll. Drop a real thought. Share it forward. Subscribe so these stories keep breathing. Every honest reaction is another crack of light where silence used to live. Lesson 1. Dignity should never depend on recognition. For those of us in our 60s, 70s, and 80s, there is something painfully familiar in watching an elderly black man treated like a suspect first and a human being second. Many of you remember when driving while black wasn't a phrase on cable news, but a quiet fear you or your neighbors carried on every highway trip. In Justice Theodore Mason's story, the sting cuts even deeper. Here is a man who spent his life shaping the law, yet on an ordinary morning, he is reduced to a question mark because his car looks too nice and his calm feels too confident. That is the first lesson. Dignity should not depend on whether a young officer, a clerk, or a stranger knows your name, your title, or your resume. It belongs to you because you have lived, struggled, raised children, buried loved ones, and paid your dues. When a society forgets that, it is not just being rude. It is quietly breaking its promise to the elders who built the very streets we now patrol. Lesson 2. Silence turns ordinary people into accomplices. Older Americans know what it is to see something wrong and feel that heavy pull to stay out of it. Maybe you saw a neighbor mistreated, a worker cheated out of pay, or a student singled out because of skin color or accent. In Mason's story, Officer Logan is not the only one on trial. Those emails, those unsigned memos, Those supervisors who sort of knew but chose comfort over courage. That is where the real damage spread. The phrase, "I thought someone else would handle it," may sound small, but it's the same sentence that has allowed bad behavior to grow for generations. If you've lived long enough, you know that evil rarely marches in wearing horns. It creeps in through 100 little silences, each person convincing themselves they don't have enough power to speak up. The truth this story shows is simple and hard. When we stay quiet around wrongdoing, we are no longer neutral. We have quietly joined the wrong side. Lesson 3. The deepest change begins in very small places. Those of us with gray hair understand that the world doesn't turn on big speeches alone. It changes in kitchens, classrooms, and quiet car rides home. Notice how the real turning point in this story is not a grand law or a press conference, but a son asking his father, "Why did that man have to stand like that?" Notice the tiny plastic fedoras on license plates. The teacher who finally says a student's name correctly. The police captain who adds one honest question to every report. None of those things will ever trend for long, but they shape the country your grandchildren will inherit. You have lived through wars, recessions, and protests. You know that the most powerful revolutions do not always shout. Sometimes they arrive as a pause before we act, a child's question we refuse to dodge, or a moment when we decide at last that "I didn't know" will no longer be good enough for officers, for teachers, or for ourselves. Conclusion. For every older American reading this, the story of Justice Mason is not a distant parable. It is an invitation. You still have the voice, the vote, the wisdom, and the moral weight to insist that dignity, truth, and courage remain non-negotiable in the country you helped build. My friends, after hearing Justice Mason's quiet strength and Officer Logan's hard lesson, I'd love to hear from you. Which moment speaks to you most? The stop itself, the leaked emails, the children's questions, or the small everyday changes? Have you ever stayed silent about something you wish you had challenged or stepped in when nobody else would? Please share your experience in the comments so others can learn from you. And if this story moved you, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so more people can reflect with us.